you and your competitor could literally show the exact same functionality in almost the exact same way, and you could be scored very differently depending on how you come across to the buyer, how you capture their attention, how you keep their attention, and how you evoke emotion in the presentation.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 45 of Sales Stories in Real Life. Today, we've got a very special guest. He is the VP of North America for high-tech acquisition at MongoDB. Check out his website, salesintroverts.com. Welcome to the show, Kyle Asay. Man, we started chatting about this a little bit pre-show, and I'm really excited to hear this story. I hear you had a really interesting experience when you were looking for a sales enablement tool and you went through an RFP, and it sounds like it was a pretty wild buying process. What happened there, Kyle?
Yeah, it was a fun exposure to the how broken buying can be and how that has such a massive impact on sellers. So we were looking for a something solution. And so we got our task force together and we all met in the big conference room, made this big plan for our criteria, our must-haves, we did procurement, shortlisted a long list of vendors. And then we probably spent 7 weeks doing like pre-vetting of these vendors. So we'd meet with all of them for discovery calls. We'd walk them through our criteria. Some of them did great discovery, some of them not great discovery. But we basically shortlisted from like 20 vendors down to I want to say 5 was the short list. So we had our short list of vendors, and in the weirdest power play move dynamic I've ever possibly seen, the executive running the RFP had them all come present on site to us at our headquarters in Provo, Utah. We had the meeting start at 7 a.m. and he literally had all of the 5 vendors fly in on the same day to come into the office at the same time. And then they rotated through the conference rooms where we had the buying committee split out into I think 3 different conference rooms. So these vendors were scheduled to rotate through. So they're literally like checking in the lobby next to their competitors. They're walking through the halls like, oh, hey, how'd your presentation go? We're going in there next, kind of a thing. Just like really kind of awkward. But so we sat in these conference rooms and we were pitched for basically 6 hours in a row by the different vendors rotating conference room to conference room with their, call it, capstone presentation based on all the things they had learned about our business throughout the prior 7 weeks of discovery conversations and the shortlisting experience. So we do this exercise, and then we all get together with our scorecards, and we all had our different preferences. Of course, it ended up being that none of our preferences actually mattered, and one of the executives kind of had his preference. So even though we all scored differently, he had a preliminary decision to go with one of his preferred vendors that none of us wanted to go with. But at the end of the day, it turns out that we didn't go with anybody. We ended up not buying anything. We didn't use the budget. We made no decision. We implemented no solution. And so I just spent probably 40 hours over the course of a couple of months doing discovery calls, scoring, vetting, shortlisting, had them all fly out to present in person on an early morning in the winter in Provo, Utah. All of that to say, you know what, we're good. So that was my one of my more memorable buying experiences, Alex.
Man, this is the side of the coin of buying that isn't talked about enough, right? Is like losing to status quo, is like losing to no decision. And it's not like you guys were approached by someone and you said, oh, hey, this is interesting, and then ended up not doing something. Like you guys put out an RFP, right? Like you guys had said, hey, we want a vendor for sales enablement, right? Like let's see what you got. So much to unpack here. I guess let's sort of start off with this. You said that some vendors did good discovery, some vendors did not such good discovery. Obviously, you talk about discovery a lot on LinkedIn. So maybe let's sort of start from the high level here. What are some sort of discovery best practices And what were some of the discovery best practices that you saw vendors doing during that process? And what were some of the not so great discovery things that
Yeah,
happened during that process?
that just reminds me of one of the discovery meetings. It was amazing. We had a half hour blocked off with this gentleman, and we literally sat on the call for over an hour because we couldn't get off the call because he just kept talking at us, and he was like talking down to us. It was actually incredible. He was like really demeaning about how we didn't know what we were doing for sales or sales training or sales methodology, and how the fact that we were even considering any other company showed how flawed our reasoning was. So he just basically shouted at us for an hour, and we couldn't even get off the call. And then we're like, "Yeah, we'll let you know, man. We got to go. We've got other news." That was hilarious. So I don't think anybody, hopefully nobody listening to this would ever even consider doing that. But to see that in real life was shocking. It was like a parody. It was like a corporate bro video of what I would expect terrible sales to look like, but I saw it in real life. So that was fun. That was fun. So don't do that. But the good discovery was people were people that came in and they started with context they already knew about our business. They were well researched. They came ready to teach us things, and then they weren't asking questions that they could find out on their own. The vast majority of companies doing discovery, it was like, all right, well, we've got Kyle on the call, we've got this guy on the call, we've got this girl on the call. So tell us about your role. Tell us about what you do at Qualtrics. I'm like, come on, you should know that. You should know that, right? You should know it before the conversation. It was talk us through what the Qualtrics market looks like. You should know that. So the not good discovery is asking questions that you can know before the call. Use that time to go a whole lot deeper. You should be able to start with level 2, level 3 questions with the context you bring to the conversation. The best sellers in the circumstance did that. They were able to go deeper faster because they had that relevant context top of mind, and they had a point of view already that they were able to validate with us and go deeper. So those were the ones that I enjoyed the conversation the most. They had context, they had a lot of questions, but they also provided context with the questions. And it felt like they were kind of teaching us things as they were extracting information, and it made for much more comfortable conversations.
Well said. First off, I can't believe I need to say this, but please don't speak demeaningly towards your prospects or your buyers or your customers. That's quite the recipe for disaster. But I love what you said too about coming in with a point of view and coming in with that research. That's a very common theme that we see amongst positive buying experiences is, like you said, those sort of elementary level or those almost 101 level questions. You got to know that stuff already. Not only does it show that you don't care or that you didn't do your research, it's also poor time management, right? Like if you've got 30 minutes, an hour, 45 minutes, however long your discovery call is, you want to get as deep as you possibly can within that limited time frame. Buyers don't just have all day to sit on the phone with you and answer your pop quiz questions. So when you go in there and like you said, you could start with those level 2, those level 3 questions right away, then you're really peeling back that layer of the onion and creating the opportunities to teach, or, hey, have you considered this, right? And kind of offer those different point of views. So let's go back into the buying process now. Almost like you said, kind of corporate bro, satire video esque. Had some really kind of wacky discovery calls, had some good discovery calls. After many months of deliberation, discovery, you guys actually invite all of the vendors there in person, right? What were some of the standout presentations in person, whether good or bad? And, what kind of takeaways would you give for our sellers that are listening based on those in-person presentations that you heard?
So those in-person presentations were really a big aha moment for me in my sales career because none of them stood out. And these were all really quality firms. A lot of them actually specialize in sales training, sales approach. But what I found myself thinking in every single presentation was just tell me, how are you different? Why would I care? And how can you prove it? And none of them could really do that. When they all came in and they started with a what we heard kind of a slide. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I know this what you heard because I spent already hours with all of you talking about that. And so they're going through and they're just walking through, like we spend the first 20 minutes talking about things we already talked about my business. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like let's go. And then they get to their approach. And it's this high level overview. And like, why is this like if I wanted a high level overview, I could just go to your website, right? And then it's like, then here's their logo slide. And like, yeah, all of the people have those same logos. Like, yeah, there's Microsoft, there's Facebook, Google, cool. Like, okay, so but we spent all this time and none of it stood out. And I'm just sitting there, why are you different? Or how are you different? Why should I care and how can you prove it? And nobody could really answer these questions. And so it's no wonder that at the end of all the presentations, we compare our scorecards and there was very little, we were all off. We all had different perceptions. And a lot of that was probably because some of us tuned in for some of the presentations and tuned out for others because we were bored. So yeah, none of them stood out, man.
We just recently had Katie Penner on, and she almost said exactly what you just said verbatim. Like when I leave a demo, right? Like when I leave a call with you as a vendor, I need to be stoked about what I hear, right? Like if you have a ton of sales presentations in a day and not one thing is memorable from any of them, that is not good selling, right? Especially when you're walking through the halls and you see your competitors there, right? You see them in the lobby, you see them in the hallways, like that you really got to bring your A game, but not just bringing your A game, but being memorable, right? Like knowing that these people are going to have fatigue, right? They've been sitting in presentations all day. Your buyers' jobs are not to just buy all day, right? They have other responsibilities. And many times you're on the phone with them, they may be, like you said, not paying attention, or their thoughts might be going in and out. So you got to really kind of grab and hold that attention big time. You said something in that last monologue too that really stood out to me, talking about scorecards. So obviously not many of us have had the privilege of being both in a buying committee and a seller. Obviously you've kind of worked your way up the ranks to do that, and big ups to you for that. Talk some of our sellers through, what does a buying scorecard look like, right? For those of us that haven't had the privilege of sitting in a buying committee. Obviously, probably different for each and every company, but what are some of sort of the common themes of a buying scorecard?
Yeah, so a lot of companies will build these out for more formal evaluations. Many won't, especially if it's not an RFP. But the way this worked is just as a buying committee, one of the first things we aligned on was what are the criteria most important to us, right? So it's things like evidence that they know our industry, evidence they can work with companies of our size, evidence that their differentiators can actually solve our business problems. And we built out this list, and then we just go through and try to score each vendor in those categories. Now, here's something that I really like to talk about, and it's the concept of evaluator and buyer psychology. You can, when you're thinking about scorecards, you and your competitor could literally show the exact same functionality in almost the exact same way, and you could be scored very differently depending on how you come across to the buyer, how you capture their attention, how you keep their attention, and how you evoke emotion in the presentation. And so where these sellers fell short is they didn't really evoke that emotion. And so the scoring, nothing stood out. And so the scoring was pretty flat across the board, right? And so it's really important as a seller to ask questions like, hey, like, are you using an evaluation scorecard for this? Most of the time they're not. And if they're not, it's actually a pretty cool opportunity to say, well, we actually we go through a lot of these processes. Would it be helpful if we shared with you what a lot of companies will use for an evaluation scorecard? And your buyer's like, yeah, we'd love that. And then you just build out a scorecard that just so happens to be biased towards your solution. And there you go, right? So that is one way to use it. But regardless of the situation, whether you're influencing the scorecard or they have a scorecard, you need to find out what's on the scorecard. And then you need to remember, you can actually really check the boxes, but that doesn't matter unless the buyer sees and remembers that you do well in those areas. Otherwise, they're going to score you poorly and you're going to lose deals that you probably should have won.
I want to keep going on this topic because we've not done this yet. I love this idea of buyer scorecards. So walk us through, like, how do you kind of tie together both let's just say the reason and the emotion, right? So kind of like the facts and the statistics, or the proof, whatever you want to say, and kind of the emotional side of things, right? Because it's very easy. Let's use technical as a word. That's probably a better word to use, because it sounds like the vendors that you were speaking to all kind of took the very technical route, right? It was just, hey, this is what we could do. This is an overview of us, right? So how do you kind of tie that emotion into the technical side of a sale?
Yeah, it's all about stories and building emotion, right? Because almost all sellers are guilty of this. They like talk about their solution and they put up a slide and they say, and by the way, 347% ROI according to Forrester, guaranteed quadruple your money. Why wouldn't you buy? And people are like, man, like, people resonate. People, when you think about how people spend their time, what do people do? They listen to podcasts, they watch Netflix, they read books, they listen to music, they go to the movies. We are attracted to stories. Buying is actually quite similar. And so when a buyer hears a story of somebody that is like them, that has the same pain, struggles, stresses, fears as them, and now that person is in a much better, happier place, there's this emotional attachment to wait, that person was like me, miserable and failing, and now they're doing wonderfully. I want to be like that. It's almost like FOMO. Like, wait, how did they do that? Oh, your solution. Okay, I'm in. That is so much more powerful than our payback period is 2.3 months and we have a 400% ROI over the first 2 years, right? Like, what's the story? What's the story of somebody like your buyer that hated their life and now they're loving their life? And how did your solution get them there? Learn to tell those stories and then show the functionality that actually bridges that gap, and people will hear it and remember it because they're going to feel it.
Mm. First off, thank you for taking us through that kind of buyer journey there of like where to insert a story, how to bring emotion into the process. And secondly, thank you for giving a huge plug to us, because the show is basically all storytelling. And
Yep.
then I kind of poke and prod with some questions afterwards. So huge believer in that. That's a really, really practical way to look at it too. I talked about this a couple episodes. Storytelling could be kind of a double-edged sword in a sense. If you as a buyer ask, hey, how does this particular widget work, right? And you're like, well, hey, let me tell you a story. Okay, then that's probably not the best time to throw a story in there. But to your point, when you're trying to evoke that emotion and before you've even shown the product, right? And you kind of have the discovery vision of, hey, these are the problems that they're facing. I actually know a company that faced this exact same problem. We helped them through it. Then insert that story, right? Of, hey, our life was so hard before this, and now we got this solution and this, and now things are going so much better. So I love how you said that. It's a very kind of straightforward way to understand not only how to evoke emotion in a sales process, but also how to tell stories in a way that are actually meaningful in the buying process and not kind of shooting yourself in the foot and just making it even more boring. So let's kind of go back to the sales scorecard one more time, if you will, because a lot of sales, I like to kind of call it like a tightrope, right? It's like you kind of have to balance like two sides of things. And if you go too far one way, you fall. If you go too far the other way, you fall. You had mentioned one of the good ways that you can go through an evaluation process with a company is by kind of asking them, like, hey, do you have a buyer scorecard, right? You said you want to know what's on that buyer scorecard. And if they're not using a buyer scorecard, great opportunity to add value and say, hey, do you want to know what other companies that are like you are using to do this? But that could get a little bit tricky to navigate, right? You don't want to just kind of say, hey, what are the answers to the test, right? Like, what are you looking for from your vendor so that I can tell you? How do you kind of walk through that to make it centered around them and their buyer scorecard and not just you trying to, kind of get the answers to the test?
Yeah. I think it's really about the intent, because when I'm thinking about helping them build out their evaluation criteria, for them, I'm removing some of their burden. I'm like, look, like you're gonna go buy this kind of a solution once every 5 years. I'm selling this solution every single day. Like, I would love to understand the way that you're thinking about evaluation, but I talk to companies like you all the time. I'm happy to share how they're thinking about the evaluation too. And the key here is having integrity and not just lying about what they should care about, right? Like, you have to be, if you're going to do this authentically and actually get people to buy in and trust you, to help them, to give you access, to help them build up evaluation criteria, they need to understand that your intent is to help them make the best decision possible, even if it's not your solution. By being willing to walk away from deals where you're not the best solution, you earn that credibility. And buyers can tell when you're trying to oversell them versus trying to help them find the right solution. But most sellers should already be asking. If you're not, you should be asking, what is your evaluation criteria? And then you should be building upon that. Okay. Companies that want A often also need B. Here's why. Here's a story for how a company had A, but not being what happened to them, kind of a thing. We need to expand the decision criteria. If you don't expand the decision criteria, you're going to be competing on price only. So that is one element. But the biggest element, man, is like, if you're doing it authentically and with the intent to help them come to the best decision as quickly as possible, it's actually perfectly appropriate to offer the help, to share how other companies think about it. And here's a template. We use this all the time. Whenever we hear a company, yeah, we love what you brought to us. We're going to go to RFP. We're going to go build an RFP. It's like, okay, well, we've received like 3 million RFPs. We've aggregated all the questions we've seen. Would you like that as a template to start with? That would be wonderful. Great. Use it, customize it. But now I started from scratch. And then I can't tell you how many times 3 weeks later we get an RFP. And it's literally exactly what we gave them. We're like, sweet. Yeah, we do have the answers to this test. So if you do it with integrity and you have credibility with the customer, they're going to be happy to let you help them build out their evaluation criteria.
I love how you framed that too. Hey, you're buying this solution once every 5 years, once every 3 years, once every 2 years, whatever it is. I'm selling this solution every day. I'm the expert in the space, right? To really make their job easy, right? You want it to be easy for them to buy, right? Don't overcomplicate it. Like you said, don't oversell it either, because then they can sense that, right? And then it's going to repel them more than it's going to bring them towards you. Whereas if you're guiding them to the best decision, whether that's you, whether that's them, whether that's no one, then that even draws them in even more. So I love how you frame that. Kyle, you obviously talk a lot about sales. You're incredibly bright. You're just now overseeing North America. I know that was a big goal for you. I know you didn't want me to say that, but I'm going to plug you anyway because you're an awesome guy and I like you a lot. We got a lot of B2B sellers that are listening to the show, and I'm sure a lot of these sellers would like to take the trajectory that you're taking, and you obviously really hone in your craft. You're a great writer. You're very, very serious about your work and your development. Out of all the things that we discussed today, which is a lot of great stuff, what would be the biggest takeaway that you'd give our sellers, right? If someone could take away one thing from this episode, what would it be?
How are you different? Why does it matter? And how can you prove it? And you need to be using that in your prospecting, in your discovery, in your demos. Here's a really easy gut check. So whenever you're doing your email outreach, for example, hopefully, like the personalization piece, the email should only be able to go to one person. Check. Okay, that's one piece. But when you get to the value proposition, the problems you solve and how, if any of your competitors could write the exact same thing, it's not different. It's not different enough. When you get into a discovery, if you're asking all the exact same questions they're going to hear from your competitor, if they're evaluating multiple people, you're not different. You're the same. And when you get to the demo, if you're showing the high level overview that all your competitors can show, it's not enough. You're not going to stand out. And so across every part of the sales cycle, make sure you're answering for your prospect how you are different than the alternatives, why those differences matter for your customers, and then what's the evidence that those things are true. If you get really good at those, you're going to see better conversion across prospecting, discovery, demos, all the way through the sales cycle, because you're going to be forced to stand out. You're going to be forced to be different, and people resonate with different. People retract from things that are the same.
I love that framework. You and I are two huge advocates of frameworks, especially frameworks over scripts. I know excuse me, you and I riff in the comments about that a lot on LinkedIn, and I could not be a bigger believer in that. And that's a phenomenal framework to follow. Sellers, key in on that. Let that be the one thing you take away this episode. Kyle, this has been absolutely fantastic. You're working on a ton. Like I said, you're always posting great content on LinkedIn. You've got your salesintroverts.com going. You just got your North America nod here at Mongo. Super proud of you for that. Why don't you plug some with the audience before we jump?
It's great to be on the show. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find my best frameworks at salesintroverts.com. I'm always trying to share things that I'm actively teaching. If I'm sharing it on LinkedIn, if I'm sharing it on my website, it's because I'm actually doing this with teams that are leading out for top tier companies in very competitive industries. It's not stuff that I haven't proven work time and time again. But Alex, great to be on, my friend.
You've got some of the most tactical sales content out there. We appreciate you making time to be on the show so much. Go file Kyle on LinkedIn. AC is spelled ASAY. Go find him on LinkedIn. Go find salesintroverts.com. Those frameworks are fantastic. If you're a seller that relies on scripts, go check out Kyle's frameworks. Frameworks leave so much space for you to personalize it and make it your own and make you be different, just like Kyle would say. Kyle, man, thanks so much. This has been a blast. Sales Stories in Real Life, fam. We will see you next week. Cheers.